Alright, it's been long enough. We need to get rid of the support system in Fire Emblem. It sucks, it's got to go. Let's talk about why. Supports were first added in Fire Emblem 3, Mystery of the Emblem. They were nothing more than passive bonuses between two characters who already had some kind of relationship. If nobody told you they were there, you probably would not notice them. This system works for what it tries to do. It adds a little flavor to a cast of characters that are lucky to have even 3 lines of dialogue. Over time, lead developer Shuzo Kaga and Intelligent Systems have expanded upon and experimented with this formula a lot. In Genealogy, it was shaken up to accommodate a lover system, only to be reverted back to its FE3 state in Thracia. And then once Intelligent Systems and Kaga parted ways, we were given the GBA system. Ah yes, the GBA era, a golden age for Fire Emblem. Now all characters start with no supports, and they can build it up through ending turns adjacent to one another until enough points are reached for the next level. C, B, and then finally A. As much as I enjoy the GBA era, adopting this system introduced the biggest flaw for supports as a way to develop characters: a lack of context. Characters can hit a support rank in a wide variety of chapters, often ranging from very early to late game, so their conversations have to be largely divorced from whatever is going on in the main story. They can comment on things that developers know is in the past, such as things that happened before a character was recruited, but that's it. Anything else is off limits. So usually characters will talk about silly things like cooking or sleeping, and they'll have a more serious conversation about their backstories and their motivations, but it'll only be somewhat related to what's going on. This limitation is mitigated by a change made in FE9, Path of Radiance. Instead of the characters building supports by ending their turn next to one another, they do so by being deployed in the same chapter. Sometimes this requires a long time. Ike and Titania have to be deployed together in 26 chapters until they can A support. This was a smart change because it gives the developers a much better idea of how far the player has progressed into the game before 2 characters have their later supports. For example, if you look at Ike and Raisin, they need to be on the field for 11 chapters before they can have their A support, and Raisin only joins in chapter 18. So Raisin can talk about confronting Ashnard, and Ike can tell him the end is in sight, since the only way they can have this conversation is if they're near the end of the game. FE9 has another great way to give characters some development outside of the main story: base conversations. While you're chilling in the base, characters can interact and discuss things that are happening right then, which makes them feel more rooted in the world around them. It also helps that both support and base conversations take place during off time, instead of on the battlefield surrounded by angry red units. It just makes a lot more sense to be talking to your bestie for 5 minutes when you're not in a skirmish. It's really hard to look at how well FE9 did supports and base convos and then see what they learned from it in future games, because they didn't. FE10 at least kept the base conversations, but it replaces all support convos with the buddy system, which only has characters saying like 1 line to each other on the battlefield. I actually don't hate the buddy system or the quick convos that came with it, but they are not a proper replacement for the support system that we had in Path of Radiance. Now, there are a bunch of characters that just have no screen time whatsoever, even though they have plenty of reasons to talk to each other. I just wish this game had more base convos to fix this problem. And then the Arcanea remakes roll around. Shadow Dragon, funnily enough, has FE9's support building system, which is good, but it has no support conversations, which, you know, I'm in favor of, except there's still absolutely nothing to replace them. And for how much crap the Arcanea games get, New Mystery actually gets the system almost right. It has FE9's support building system, and the supports take place off the battlefield, and they almost have base convos, except the base conversations are all involving Marth and the Avatar has most of the supports, and then there's things like How's Everyone, which it's not really dialogue, it's short monologues. They were so close, but they'll get it right in the next entry, yes? Well, yes and no. Let's start with the yes. Fire Emblem has not seen full support convos on the battlefield since the GBA entries. They're always relegated to the base from Path of Radiance onwards. The way you unlock conversations has changed drastically though, with additions like the pair-up system from Awakening and the hub world introduced in 3 houses. There is a lot to criticize for both of those, but I do like that they add some sense to support building. Standing next to someone for 96 turns or being deployed on the same battlefield doesn't really build a relationship the way sharing a meal or actually fighting together does. That's not to say I love these mechanics unconditionally, but I do like what they do for support building. My problem with modern Fire Emblem support convos is twofold. First off, they've barely changed with the times. Fire Emblem has its support conversations take place in a monastery or in a magical castle, but it's still almost always just 2 people talking to each other. Sometimes the writers threaten to make it look a little more interesting, but it always just results in a fade to black with some generic sound effects because they really can't be bothered to animate these kinds of scenes. And I get it, because individual support conversations are clearly not important enough in the grand scheme of things to bother dedicating animation time to. If I had to choose between a fully animated Ferdinand Byleth support or better actual cutscenes or battle animations, I'm never picking the Ferdinand Byleth support, it's just not a priority. But whenever they resort to things like fade-outs, you're reminded of how rushed this game is and how little it wants to focus on making support interesting. It's a sharp contrast to the effort they put into voice acting and character building for 3 houses. The amount of love that the voice actors put into bringing these characters to life is astonishing, but it makes these silly scenes look so bad. It takes what could have been a really good scene and then puts it on a level of Pokemon Sword and Shield. It sucks. Well, that's the first problem. The second problem is that the context issue I talked about earlier in the vid is still there. Because conversations can be unlocked almost whenever, they're still almost always about side stuff. It still feels very distant of what's happening, especially in Awakening and Fates. I feel like 3 houses kind of knew how to solve this, but then threw it all away. On one hand, they were smart enough to lock some conversations behind certain chapters, such as A supports not being available until part 2. But the A supports are still written like follow-ups to the B supports, even though they often happen 5 years apart, and that makes them make no sense. I feel like the modern CBA supports are written back to back to follow a logical little mini story in a vacuum. When I watched some Fate supports for another video, I thought they were honestly much better than Fates gets credit for. But that's probably because the way players experience support conversations is not CBA, CBA, CBA. It's usually a more billion C supports in a row, and then some Bs, and then maybe finally some As. They don't fit into the narrative at all. Not to mention that C supports often repeat funny character traits. Bernadetta is notorious for being the same in almost every one of her C supports. Even if she goes through a character arc in a later convo, she's still stuck screaming her lungs out in the next C support you watch. It works just fine if you look at the support chain on its own, but they don't work as 3 separate conversations in somewhat random spots scattered across the story. And that's why, like I said at the start of the video, I think Fire Emblem needs to retire this support system. It doesn't work anymore, and there are better systems to adopt that would allow them to flesh out the characters and help integrate them into the world they're in. Here's my super hot take. Most characters should have scenes within the story itself. They should react to the events at hand, talk to other characters about what's happening, and there should even be events within the gameplay that allow these characters to actively participate. You can even have support events where 2 characters go through something together, and as a result they could increase their support rank for gameplay benefits. Tearing Saga does this, and it works great, giving almost every character a chance to shine. It makes them feel more like actual people that live and breathe within the world, showing what impact the events have on them. Other fantasy RPGs do this all the time, and it's a great way to sell your characters. Now I can hear critics say, but wait, what about permadeath? Because that's why Fire Emblem seems like a poor fit for this kind of system. And yeah, you have to work around this issue, but it's not like there are no solutions. First of all, there's the Band-Aid solution Fire Emblem has always applied for important characters. They die in the gameplay, but in the story they just retreat and they can still partake in conversations. This is not ideal because it takes away some of the severity of permadeath. If you have a lot of people just retreat instead of actually dying, then it doesn't really feel much like a war game, where your beloved character can die at any moment, so retreat must be used with restraint. The second solution is to trust players to want to keep characters alive. Permadeath is not as important of a mechanic anymore as it used to be, and it shows. The developers know that people these days will generally not move on with members of their party dead. There's a lot of evidence for this. There's less redundancy in the cast now compared to the days of Arcanea. There's a bigger emphasis on building units rather than working with what you have, and the 3 most recent games in the series have rewind mechanics. None of these decisions make sense if you assume people are just going to let units die, so they can write the scenes knowing that. And if it does happen anyway, there's always the third solution. Write the game with the possibility in mind that characters can die. You can have backup scenes written with simple decision trees. If this character is dead, use this other one instead. And if that one is dead too, then maybe just use characters that you know cannot be dead, such as the main character. You can make those replacement scenes shorter, simpler, and less satisfying, since less people will see them and it gives replay value if someone does see them. Even better, you can write events in a way that actually incorporates the potential permadeath of an important person. For example, think about the Firne arc in Engage. You get Alfred in chapter 3, and then he can die there. Then you get to chapter 4, and Celine joins, but she finds out that Alfred has died. That's potential drama right there. Now, you very critical listeners might think, but that's a lot of work. Imagine having to write all that and let alone voice acting all these different scenes. Well, shit, yeah, it is a lot of work, but they did things like that before in Shadows of Valentia. And more importantly, you know what else is a lot of work? Writing and voice acting 650 support conversations.